Once again, the Queen of Consorts surprises us, but not in a good way.
Made lurid and false claims about the royal family, which played on her fears and fueled paranoia.
The Windsor Luncheon was meant to prove that one fractured family could still occupy the same room without reopening old wounds. Instead, one exchange changed everything. Catherine fought to hold herself together. Harry refused to retreat. And William, watching his wife break under pressure, made a decision no one around the table expected. The prince rose, stopped the gathering immediately, and brought an important royal luncheon to an abrupt, deeply uncomfortable end. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Prince William entered the Windsor Luncheon believing restraint might achieve what distance had not. The gathering was small, bringing Princess Catherine, Prince Harry, King Charles, Queen Camilla, and a circle of royals together after family estrangement. A private royal luncheon, in simple terms, was an informal family meal rather than a public ceremony. But the stakes were enormous, because one careless remark could reopen wounds. Catherine knew that better than anyone. She had carried public scrutiny around the Sussex conflict, while trying to protect stability for her family, and Harry's presence made pauses heavier. Harry had been measured at first, but the calm did not last. The conversation shifted toward the breakdown between the brothers, and then he made a pointed remark about Catherine's role in that collapse. She froze. William watched her expression change, while Charles sensed where the exchange was heading. Catherine tried to answer without turning the meal into a confrontation. Yet the pressure broke through. Her voice weakened, her eyes filled, and she rose from the table. William did not hesitate. He stood, declared that the luncheon was over, and followed her toward an adjoining room rather than remaining to negotiate with his brother. Harry stayed seated for stunned seconds, staring at the place William had left. Charles said nothing, and that silence carried its own verdict. One aide closed the dining room doors as staff were told not to continue serving, turning the prince's decision into a formal ending rather than a pause. Queen Camilla watched the king carefully and noticed what Harry could not ignore. The monarch did not challenge William. He did not ask Catherine to return. For Camilla, that silence suggested Charles understood why the line had been crossed. The shock was not simply that Catherine had cried. It was what Harry had said immediately before she left, and why William recognized those words as something far more dangerous than an argument over lunch. To understand why a few words could destroy an entire afternoon at Windsor, the emotional fault lines between William, Catherine, Harry, and Charles have to be understood first. Nobody entered that room carrying the same hope. William wanted restraint. Catherine wanted dignity. Charles wanted his sons to survive one meal without reopening years of bitterness. Harry wanted something far more complicated. Recognition that his pain had never disappeared simply because palace life continued without him. That difference mattered. Because beneath the polite conversation sat four completely different versions of the same family history, and eventually, one of those versions was going to collide with another. William had never viewed the Windsor Luncheon as a grand reconciliation. To him, it was a test. Could Prince Harry sit across from Princess Catherine without dragging old accusations back into the room? Could one family meal remain just that, a family meal, without becoming another trial over who had suffered most? The stakes reached beyond personal discomfort. The prince knew that every fresh rupture with his brother placed more pressure on Catherine, and threatened the stability surrounding the family expected to carry the monarchy into its next generation. Catherine felt that pressure before anyone sat down. She paused outside the luncheon room, took William's hand, and said quietly, "I'm fine." He noticed how quickly she said it. She then asked him not to defend her against every uncomfortable comment, because she did not want Harry believing she needed protection simply to remain in the same room. William agreed, but only partly. He told her that if the conversation became personal, they would leave. Neither of them knew that hours later he would go much further and end the entire gathering. Charles carried a different burden. The king understood that bringing his sons together mattered because their division had stopped being a temporary family dispute and had become something woven into the monarchy's future. Before lunch, he spoke privately with Harry and made one request unmistakably clear. Catherine, Meghan, memoirs, interviews, and previous accusations were not to dominate the table. The monarch was not asking his younger son to forget the past. He was asking him to recognize that this gathering could survive only if certain wounds remained untouched for a few hours. Harry heard the warning, but frustration was already building. He had no intention of sitting like a guest who was expected to accept everyone else's version of what had happened. Polite conversation about family and ordinary matters only sharpened that feeling. To him, avoiding the painful subjects meant pretending they had disappeared. Charles sensed the resistance, while William watched his brother carefully and remembered exactly why the boundary mattered. The danger had begun long before anyone lifted a glass at Windsor. Months earlier, Harry and William had already confronted the question of Catherine's role in their fractured relationship, and that private exchange had ended with one line the future king believed could never be crossed again. That earlier incident, the moment everyone thought had been buried, was the hidden fuse beneath the Windsor table. The luncheon did not collapse because of one careless sentence. The real beginning came months earlier, behind closed doors, when Harry and William attempted something they had repeatedly failed to do: speak without advisors, statements, or public pressure between them. For several minutes, the conversation remained calm. Then Catherine's name entered it. William's entire posture changed. Harry pushed his argument further, and before the meeting ended, one boundary had been drawn so clearly that neither brother could later claim misunderstanding. William had agreed to that private Windsor conversation because he still believed disagreement did not have to mean permanent separation. The purpose was simple: establish rules for future family contact before another gathering brought old tensions back into the open. Harry understood that any future meeting involving Princess Catherine would be especially sensitive. She could not publicly answer every accusation without deepening the royal crisis, and the prince believed reconciliation would become impossible if his wife remained a permanent target inside disputes between the brothers. Harry changed the temperature when he argued that Catherine should acknowledge her part in the hostility surrounding Meghan's royal experience. William rejected the idea immediately. He told his brother that she would no longer be used as a bargaining point in arguments about the past. Harry pushed back, saying that removing her from the discussion meant removing uncomfortable history itself. William answered that reopening every grievance would destroy any chance of normal family contact before it even began. Catherine learned later that her name had dominated part of the exchange, and the knowledge unsettled her deeply. She told William she hated becoming another reason the brothers could not speak freely. He refused that interpretation. To him, the problem was not her existence inside the family conflict. The problem was the expectation that she should repeatedly defend herself whenever old Sussex grievances returned. He made one condition unmistakable: future family meetings could happen only if Catherine was treated with respect and was not confronted over those disputes during private occasions. Harry never gave William the agreement he wanted. Instead, he said that silence could not become the price of reconciliation. The prince remembered those words. He remembered them because the answer sounded less like acceptance and more like a warning that the subject was merely being postponed. William finally placed his untouched glass down and looked directly at his brother. "There is nothing more to discuss," he said, "if Catherine remained part of Harry's case against the family." The meeting ended there, but the argument did not. Months later, at the Windsor Luncheon, Harry would use different words and a calmer tone. William would recognize the same argument immediately. So when the forbidden subject finally surfaced across the table, he did not hear an isolated remark. He heard a warning, being deliberately ignored. The room did not explode at first. That made the moment worse. Harry spoke calmly. Catherine listened. William stopped eating. Charles looked from one son to the other, already sensing where the conversation was moving. Then Harry connected Catherine directly to the pain Meghan had experienced during royal life, and questioned whether enough responsibility had ever been acknowledged. Catherine's expression changed. William warned him once. Harry continued. Seconds later, the entire purpose of the luncheon was gone. Harry had crossed into the very territory Charles had asked him to avoid. The king had wanted the Windsor meal to remain separate from arguments surrounding the Sussex departure, meaning Harry and Meghan's withdrawal from senior royal duties and the bitter disputes that followed. Catherine understood the danger immediately. She said little at first, because answering him directly could turn a private family gathering into another defining confrontation. William watched her restraint, while the monarch watched his younger son keep pushing toward the subject everyone had been told to leave outside the room. Catherine finally answered when Harry argued that past hurt could not simply be erased for the convenience of reunion. She told him quietly that she would not accept responsibility for every breakdown that had happened around him and Meghan. He replied that silence had consequences too, suggesting she had benefited from remaining quiet, while accusations and counter-accusations consumed both couples. Her voice faltered. William heard it. "Enough," he said. The word was short, controlled, and unmistakable. Harry looked directly across the table at his brother and insisted he should be allowed to finish. William pushed his chair back and stood. He told him Catherine would not be interrogated at a family meal. Charles remained silent as tension hardened around them. Catherine wiped away tears, rose, and left through the adjoining doorway. William watched her go, then turned back toward his brother, with every trace of patience gone. Harry had heard the warning months earlier. Now he had ignored it in front of the one person the boundary was meant to protect. William made the next decision instantly. He did not simply announce that he and Catherine were leaving. He told everyone the luncheon itself was finished. Staff were instructed to stop service and clear the room. Harry stared at him in disbelief, but the greater shock came from Charles. The king did not order the meal resumed. He did not challenge his elder son. His silence allowed the decision to stand. That changed the meaning of everything. William had acted first as a husband, but he had just ended a gathering, with the monarch still seated at the table. Now the crisis moved beyond hurt feelings. The question was unavoidable. Did William truly have the authority to shut down a Windsor gathering involving the king himself? That question would pull the drama away from personal anger and straight into the complicated machinery of royal power. William had not become king. Yet nobody told him to sit down. Nobody ordered the plates returned. Even Charles allowed the doors to close. That silence carried enormous weight, because the luncheon existed under the king's roof, with the monarch physically present. William's command therefore raised a deeper question than family anger. Had he acted impulsively as a husband, or had everyone around him already accepted that protecting Catherine justified ending the entire occasion? Charles understood the distinction immediately. As sovereign, the reigning monarch who formally stands at the head of the royal institution, he held the highest authority in the room. But this was not a constitutional ceremony, a formal event tied to the machinery of state. It was a private family gathering. William could decide whether he and Catherine remained, and once the king chose not to reverse his son's decision, the matter was effectively settled. No legal order was needed. No formal declaration had to be made. Silence was enough. Charles stayed seated after William followed Catherine from the room. He looked toward the place she had occupied, then quietly told an aide that service should not continue. The order was calm, but the emotion behind it was not. He felt sympathy for Harry, because he knew his younger son carried years of anger and believed those wounds had never been fully heard. Yet the monarch also knew that Harry had been warned. The boundary had been explained before lunch, and then William had repeated it at the table. Continuing after that warning changed everything. Camilla saw the conflict tearing at Charles. In private, she told him that bringing William and Catherine back would only deepen their humiliation. The Queen Consort understood that forced reconciliation could look peaceful for a few minutes and still create resentment that lasted for years. Charles agreed. When a senior household aide asked whether Harry should remain for the post-luncheon conversation originally planned between the family members, the king answered without hesitation. There would be no further meeting that afternoon. William made his own position equally clear. He told staff that Catherine's departure was not to be disguised as illness, fatigue, or a scheduling problem. He would not turn her distress into another convenient palace explanation. If questions emerged inside the household, the truth was simple. The luncheon ended because a personal boundary had been crossed. Charles later entered a small sitting room where Harry was waiting alone. He did not raise his voice. He did not lecture. He simply asked why his son continued after William told him to stop. Harry's answer hardened the crisis. He said the confrontation had become inevitable because avoiding the grievance did not make it disappear. If speaking meant losing access, then he would accept that consequence rather than pretend peace existed. By the time Windsor fell quiet, the luncheon was over, but the consequences were only beginning to spread through the family. Hours earlier, the family had entered Windsor, hoping one meal might lower the temperature. By afternoon, every person involved understood the opposite had happened. Catherine was devastated. William was furious. Harry felt silenced. Charles was left with a reunion attempt collapsing under his own roof. Yet the most painful consequence was not public embarrassment. The gathering had been private. The deeper damage came from a realization none of them could escape. Future contact would now require boundaries stronger than the ones already broken. William canceled everything connected to the rest of the afternoon and stayed with Catherine. The decision mattered because the gathering had been designed as more than a meal. It was supposed to reopen a path toward family contact after years of bitterness. Instead, the prince made his wife's emotional well-being the immediate priority. Harry, meanwhile, was informed that the planned private conversation with Charles and his brother would not take place. That meeting had been his chance to speak more openly after lunch. Now even that door had closed. Catherine sat privately with William and admitted something he did not expect. She was angry at herself for crying. To her, the tears had given Harry's words more power than they deserved. William rejected that immediately. He told her the responsibility belonged to the person who had ignored the warning, not to the person who had finally reached her limit. Still, the future king was unsettled. He could not stop wondering whether ending the luncheon had protected Catherine, or pushed reconciliation with his brother even further away. Harry faced the same collapse from the opposite side. In a private conversation with Charles, he insisted he had not wanted to humiliate Catherine. He believed honesty required acknowledging pain that had never disappeared. The king listened, but his answer was firm. Honesty, he told his son, did not remove the responsibility to recognize when another person was hurting. Charles then made a decision of his own. Any future meeting between the brothers would begin privately, without their spouses present. Another joint family gathering would not happen until William and Harry could speak without turning everyone around them into part of the conflict. Catherine then changed the direction of everything. She told William she did not want him demanding that Harry be permanently excluded from future family settings. He looked at her in disbelief. After what had just happened, why protect even the possibility of another meeting? Her answer was quiet, but decisive. Protecting herself did not require destroying every path back. William said nothing for a moment. The anger was still there, but something inside it shifted. Catherine's tears had ended the luncheon, yet her refusal to let those tears control the future forced him to see the conflict differently. And that choice would lead directly to the most important private conversation still to come. The decisive moment did not happen around a royal table. No aides stood nearby. No king settled the argument. William and Catherine were alone when she told him what she wanted next, and it was not revenge. She did not ask him to cut Harry off forever. She did not demand another public boundary. Instead, Catherine asked her husband to separate forgiveness from access, and love from permission. That distinction changed everything. William initially believed the safest answer was distance. He did not want another private family gathering, placing Catherine and Harry in the same room until the wounds from Windsor had settled. To him, that was protection, not punishment. Catherine agreed that space was necessary, but she refused to let one disastrous luncheon become permanent proof that reconciliation could never happen. The distinction mattered because the family had already spent years allowing every failed conversation to harden into something larger. Catherine spoke carefully. Harry should not return to intimate family settings, she told William, until he could accept that emotional honesty did not give anyone the right to confront people whenever they chose. She could forgive eventually, without pretending what happened had been acceptable. William listened, still carrying the anger of watching her leave the table in tears. He admitted that the moment had revived years of frustration he thought he had learned to control, especially the feeling that she kept absorbing consequences from battles she had never started. Catherine did not soften the truth to make him comfortable. She told William that forgiveness without boundaries would only invite the same pain again. But boundaries without any possibility of forgiveness would turn hurt into permanent exile. The prince understood then that she was offering something more difficult than anger. She was asking for restraint without surrender, distance without vengeance. And that changed his next move. William decided he would speak to Harry again, but alone. Catherine would not act as mediator, witness, or bargaining point. When he later spoke privately with Charles, the king supported that choice. The monarch told his son that reconciliation could not be commanded from above, and could not survive if either brother treated the next conversation as a victory to be won. William knew that meant the burden now rested with him. The moment came quietly. William wrote Harry a short private message asking for a future conversation, then stopped before sending it. Catherine watched him hesitate. "Send it when you mean it," she said. He read the words again, then pressed send. But before either brother could answer what came next, the family lost control of the story. News of the abruptly ended Windsor Luncheon began leaking beyond the private walls around it. And once the outside world learned that William had ended a royal family gathering after Catherine left in tears, a private wound became a public judgment. By the following morning, the argument no longer belonged only to the family. The words spoken at Windsor remained private, but the outline of what happened was suddenly everywhere. Catherine had become emotional, Harry had been involved, and William had terminated the luncheon. Support hardened immediately around opposing sides. To some, the prince had defended his wife. To others, Harry had once again been denied the chance to confront painful history. One private table had become a national argument about loyalty. Palace staff refused to provide a detailed account of the exchange, and that silence changed the shape of the story. Without a full transcript, meaning a complete written record of everything said in the room, the public filled the gaps with competing versions. Supporters of Prince William focused on Catherine's distress and the warning Harry had ignored. Those sympathetic to him argued that unresolved grievances could not simply be buried because the family wanted a peaceful lunch. The lack of official detail prevented a direct public war, but it also allowed every side to see what it already believed. Catherine understood the scale of the damage over breakfast. A London newspaper carried the words, "William ends Windsor Lunch," across its front page, with a subheading centered on her leaving the gathering emotionally distressed. She looked at William, and immediately worried that her tears had become the entire story. He told her the headlines changed nothing about what happened inside the room. She had reached her limit. Harry had continued, and the prince had acted. Harry reacted with growing frustration. He believed the public focus on Catherine's tears erased the grievance he had been trying to raise and reduced the confrontation to a simple story of cruelty and protection. Charles saw another danger entirely. The king feared that every future meeting between his sons would now be judged as either reconciliation or war. That mattered, because real family repair would require awkward, imperfect conversations, not immediate proof that everything had been fixed. Charles therefore backed a deliberate palace position. There would be no public attack on Harry, no denial that the luncheon ended early, and no attempt to push Catherine into a staged appearance of unity. William rejected suggestions that the family appear together quickly to calm speculation. To him, that would repeat the very mistake that had brought them here, protecting appearances while trust underneath continued to fracture. The noise outside Windsor kept growing, but the final decision would not be made in headlines. William, Catherine, Charles, and Harry still had to decide what the failed luncheon had permanently changed, and what small possibility it had somehow left alive. The public wanted winners and losers. Inside the family, the final verdict would be quieter, harder, and far more permanent. The Windsor luncheon failed. There was no pretending otherwise. Catherine walked away in tears. William ended the gathering. Harry left without the reconciliation he had hoped for, and Charles watched another attempt to reunite his sons collapse. Yet failure did something years of careful palace management had not achieved. It forced every person involved to accept one truth. Peace could not mean silence, but honesty could not mean unlimited access to another person's pain. From that point forward, the rules changed. William and Catherine reached their decision without drama. Future contact with Harry would remain possible, but private family occasions would no longer be used to settle historic grievances. That mattered, because family gatherings had repeatedly become pressure points, where old disputes could suddenly overwhelm the people least prepared to answer them. Catherine wanted distance, but not permanent exile. William wanted protection, but not revenge. Together, they chose a harder path. Boundaries strong enough to protect them, but not so absolute that reconciliation became impossible. Charles came to his own painful conclusion. The king could arrange invitations, encourage meetings, and create opportunities, but he could not repair the relationship between his sons through royal planning alone. The monarch finally accepted that genuine progress had to happen directly between William and Harry. No seating plan could create trust. No carefully managed gathering could manufacture forgiveness. And after Windsor, he stopped trying to force unity before the people involved were ready for it. Catherine refused to let the tears define her. In a private conversation with William, she told him that leaving the table had not been weakness. Staying after the discussion became personally destructive would have meant betraying her own limits. He understood. The prince also stopped questioning whether ending the luncheon had been too extreme. Harry had been warned, the boundary had been ignored, and William now saw his decision for what it was. Not punishment, but protection. Harry reached a difficult truth of his own. He did not withdraw the pain behind what he had tried to say, but he accepted that confronting Catherine at that moment had destroyed any chance of his message being heard. The hurt caused by the delivery had swallowed the grievance itself. Charles understood that distinction too, and chose time and direct conversation over another forced reunion. William later asked Catherine whether she wished the luncheon had never happened. She answered that she wished it had happened differently, but not that the truth about their limits had stayed hidden. That became the real verdict. The Windsor luncheon did not heal the family. It ended the illusion that reconciliation required pretending nothing hurt. Catherine kept her dignity. William found clarity. Harry received a boundary he could no longer misunderstand. Charles accepted what even a king could not command. The meal ended in tears, but its legacy was clarity. William had shut the luncheon. Catherine had drawn the emotional line. And from that day forward, royal peace would have to be earned, not staged. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.